100 years ago, women and men across the United States achieved a monumental win for the women's rights movement. On August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified, extending suffrage to women. In honor of the United States Suffrage Centennial, we invite you to jump aboard the Suffrage Special Whistle Stop Tour. The Suffrage Special train will make 8 virtual whistle stops. We will visit Spokane, Pasco, Ellensburg, Vancouver, Bellingham, Seattle, Tacoma, and reach the end of the line in Olympia on August 26th. Join us as the Suffrage Special Whistle Stop Tour winds through Washington once again.
Located on the eastern half of Washington state, in the inland Northwest, is home to the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture, also known as the Eastern Washington State Historical Society, the Joel E. Ferris Research Archives, and the historic Campbell House. Located in the archives of this institution is evidence of the rich history of suffragists, female activists, and women helping women who have worked tirelessly for the rights and equality of all women since Washington became a state in 1889. They mark a legacy of work that is carried on to this day. Spokane suffragist May Arkwright Hutton exemplifies a tradition of supporting women and children in our society. May wanted women to have a voice at the table when it came to promoting justice for all citizens. Along with promoting women's suffrage, she put her wealth and time into personally helping Spokane women and children in need. Born July 26, 1860 in Washingtonville, Ohio, Mary Arkwright Hutton, commonly known as May, was sent to live with her blind, politically active paternal grandfather. As a child, May escorted him to political meetings, which may have given her a taste for politics. May made her way to Idaho's Coeur d'Alene mining area in 1883, where she married locomotive engineer Levi W. Hutton 4 years later. They lived in Wallace, Idaho, where she managed the restaurant of the Wallace Hotel. The Huttons invested their savings and labor in the Hercules mine. The investment was rewarded when the mine eventually produced enough silver and lead to make them millionaires. They moved to Spokane in 1906, where Levi began investing in real estate. May focused on her charity work, became a prime mover in Washington women's suffrage, and was an active figure in Democratic Party politics. In 1915, the Spokane Daily Chronicle paid tribute to May's many accomplishments, including her work on behalf of many charities, including the Florence Crittenton Home for Wayward Women. The Spokane Daily Chronicle reported that she organized systems of distribution which she personally conducted during the winter months, especially to families of the poor, making her a recognized leader in the individual social services work of Spokane. Overflowing baskets of food and hundreds of pairs of shoes each winter reached the needy, the bulk of which was distributed personally. The Huttons owned the Regal Shoe Store, where she bought so many shoes for children in need that she was her own best customer. May's personality was seen in her charity work, always direct and straightforward when dealing with people and their needs. In a letter from the archives of the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture, May wrote to one woman's estranged husband, "I have this afternoon been performing a sad duty. I have been helping your son's mother select a casket and a burial place to lay him away. I have known Mrs. Griffith for some time. She has for years been doing her best to support herself and invalid son." May went on to tell the father that when she met Mrs. Griffith, she and her son were living in a small room with very little food. Mrs. Griffith was looking for work to support herself, and Mrs. Hutton helped her secure sewing jobs. She went on to thank Mr. Griffith for the $100 that he had sent, but that the funeral costs would be an additional $100. She told Mr. Griffith, "From what I have learned, you are financially able to pay the cost of the indebtedness, and I trust this is true, as it will be very hard for Charlie's mother, in her nervous and broken condition, to earn the money to pay for his last illness and the balance of the funeral expenses, and I naturally suppose you would not want your son buried by charity." Mr. Griffith sent the additional $100. When May spoke about the importance of giving women the right to vote because it would help individual women improve their lives, she may have had women such as Mrs. Griffith in mind. May rallied Eastern Washington residents' support for an amendment to the Washington Constitution giving women the right to vote in the state. May, serving as the president of the Spokane Equal Suffrage Club, organized a day of entertainment and banquets for the delegates aboard the Suffrage Special train, together with the Spokane Chamber of Commerce. The day of festivities included breakfast for the delegates made by May at her Hutton building apartment, an automobile ride about the city during the morning, and then the delegates were escorted to the Spokane Amateur Athletic Club building for a plunge in the pool. There was a banquet held at the Hall of Doges in the Davenport Hotel in honor of the national officers of the Suffrage Association, along with supportive Washington legislators. The Spokesman Review announced that the highlight of the banquet was the presentation of a gavel made of wood from states where women could already vote: Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Idaho. The June 28th Whistle Stop celebration created new supporters of women's suffrage. Along with welcoming the delegates to the city and presenting the gavel, the mayor declared himself a suffragist. May Arkwright Hutton and the Spokane suffragists impressed Spokane voters while showing hospitality to the national delegates. The Spokane women boarded the 2 extra cars added to the train for their group and headed to Seattle. Even with May's success during Spokane's leg of the Whistle Stop Tour in 1909 and the campaign of 1910, the road toward suffrage in Washington state was not always smooth. Emma Smith DeVoe, president of the Washington Equal Suffrage Association, and May Arkwright Hutton, vice president of the Washington Equal Suffrage Association, were 2 of Washington state's most prominent suffragist leaders. While the 2 women had the same goal, they did not always see eye to eye on the methods of how to achieve that goal. May Arkwright Hutton and Emma Smith DeVoe had a cordial working relationship over many years during their quest for suffrage in the Northwest. However, as the Washington State Amendment was getting closer to a vote, the conflicts between the 2 came to a head.
During the women's suffrage campaign, May Arkwright Hutton was asked to comment on the subject of votes for women by a reporter for the Spokane Spokesman Review. Here's what she said. "I believe in women's suffrage for the reason that taxation without representation is tyranny. That woman is amenable to the laws under which she and her children live and has a right to a voice in making such laws. That man is not woman's keeper and has no more inherent right to think and vote for her than he has to suffer for her crimes. That woman is intellectually, morally, and physically prepared for citizenship. That the ballot in the hands of woman will do more to raise the standard of citizenship than all other reforms put together. That woman's political emancipation will give her added power in securing control of the children she has the fortitude to bear and in most cases rear. That the industrial position of women will never be properly adjusted until she has the prestige of the ballot to enforce her demands, as have men. That when women as a class become conscious of their state of helpless dependency on account of their unfranchised condition, women's emancipation is assured." While working throughout the state of Washington for women's suffrage, May Arkwright Hutton and Emma Smith DeVoe kept in touch through regular correspondence. That way they knew what each other were up to. Here's a letter from November 18, 1908. "Dear Mrs. DeVoe, I wanted to tell you that I went before the members-elect to the legislature from this district in session here yesterday at the Chamber of Commerce. I left them a petition and told them we would be at Olympia in forces with petitions of 20,000 names of women who desire the vote in Washington and men who desire that women should vote. I think I made a favorable impression. I could not let such an opportunity pass for presenting our cause. May. And here's a second letter written just 9 days later. My dear Mrs. DeVoe, I have just found the time to reply to your letter of the 21st. The petitions are coming in all filled, and in some instances they are asking for a second one. Mrs. Baker is still going ahead with her work and expects to have a column in the Sunday Review of December 6th. Can you not write something for this article? This comes out the day before the opening of the National Apple Show here, and large numbers of people will see it. Now, with regard to your coming over here, I think between the 12th and the 15th would be about the right time. In the chilly days ahead, you will come to Spokane, and you and I will take my big red automobile and get converts for the suffrage cause primarily, and have a good time generally. Now, her letters weren't always all business. She did like to add a little bit of personality and personal interest into them as well. She goes on to say, we are having a very interesting time at our house just now. 8 of my Ohio relatives walked in this morning before we had our pants on. One of them is a baby 5 months old who lays here cooing to me while I dictate this letter. Lovingly, May Arkwright Hutton. A few days later, Emma Smith DeVoe continued their active correspondence with this response.
December 2, 1908, Thorpe, Washington. Dear Mrs. Hutton, your gracious letter received. I am thrilled to know of the good work you are doing with the petitions. I also hear that Mrs. Baker can now claim 25 newspapers east of the mountains which are printing her, if I may use the term, propaganda. May I suggest that you send notes of personal thanks to the editors responsible after each printing. I have done this in other states since the beginning. When the bird opportunity comes my way, I always like to have a handful of salt to throw on its tail. And there can be no substitute for the good will of the press. Most of my time these days is taken with the scheduling for next year's advance upon the legislature. I propose to organize the lobbying efforts in relays so that the legislators will be continuously confronted with fresh groups of well-informed and articulate women, and 2 theaters of operations at once. Sometimes I feel like a cross between a social director and a Roman general. A legion here, a regiment there, all roads lead to Olympia. I shall be pleased to visit you later in the month if I can possibly get away. In addition to the above, I am also part nomad, as you know. Yours for success, Emma Smith DeVoe.
Conflict and the work of suffragists didn't end with the passage of the constitutional amendment that gave the women of Washington state the right to vote in 1910. When asked why women needed the right to vote, May said, "Women should vote because they have the intelligence to vote. They should vote because it gives them responsibilities, and responsibilities better fit women for all conditions of life. Equality before the law gives women a fair chance with men in a question of wages for the same work. In other words, the enfranchisement of women means a square deal for all." We asked women of Spokane what the right to vote means to them today. Here is what they had to say.
What it means to me is I get to have a voice in what happens in my country. I don't usually let other people tell me what to do. I should be able to have a say in what I'm doing in my country.
Voting in Washington gives me the opportunity to have an impact to our future in Washington. So it's a very meaningful thing for me. It's a big responsibility, and I have come to take it a lot more seriously.
As a female, having not had rights to vote years ago, I feel like it's important to just vote now that I have the chance to, on behalf of those who didn't get a chance to. And as well as just being an African American in general and not having the rights to vote, I feel like it's almost like a double whammy, you know? And so I should definitely take on that job of voting, and how I I can like continue to influence other people to vote too.
I think the right to vote in Washington State feels more like a duty to me. It's my civic duty for multiple reasons. One being that there were many people who fought and literally died for my right to vote, and so for me it's not even a choice. It's anytime I have the opportunity for my voice to be heard, I will fill out my ballot and send it in.
Well, I'm proud of the fact that women in Washington State had the vote long before other women in the country and other women in the world had that right to vote. I always mention that to my students when we're talking about the women's suffrage movement in Europe, that women here in Washington already had some rights to vote, and then of course we came a little bit after the Europeans for the nationwide ability to vote.
Before working on this production, I was not deeply aware of the history of women's suffrage, but as I've been researching my character and working on this production, I've been amazed at how many women were involved in actively working to get women the vote, and how different those women were from all across the country, from all walks of life, with very different backgrounds, agendas, reasons for wanting the vote, and yet coming together and uniting as one to achieve that victory.
I think one really important thing that I've learned from researching May and Emma and the suffrage movement in general is how much throughout the movement women disagreed with each other, and yet they just kept moving forward, working toward that goal. It's amazing. I mean, and I think a good lesson for all of us to learn from.
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay.
It doesn't, but I'm interested.
I think of Hutton Settlement. I have a lot of friends who currently attend there, so that's what I think of.
When I think of Mrs. Hutton, I always remember that she and her husband were extremely generous and helpful to orphans, and now not necessarily orphans, but kids who need a safe place to live. But I also am aware that she was a very extravagant force in the state, in getting Washington State to have the right to vote. She's a character. She did not do it meekly. She did it with a roar, and I love that. Well-behaved women hardly ever make history, right? So I love that about Mrs. Hutton.
So when I first learned about May, she stood out to me kind of like the unsinkable Molly Brown of Titanic fame. I know that she was an incredible, gregarious, larger-than-life character, and that she fought really hard for women's rights to vote here in Washington State, but specifically, she was located in Spokane.
I believe that she would not be satisfied with the fact that women have the vote, the right to vote. I think she would be working very hard to make sure that every woman actively participated in elections. I think that the work that she would do for equality and inclusion for women in the electoral process would be an ongoing battle for her.
I think they'd be very happy. I think they'd be very pleased with how many women are in government at all levels across the country. And particularly the fact that here in Washington, we now have 2 women senators and 5 of our 10 representatives in Congress are women. I think that they'd be very pleased about that.
I feel like the only work that needs to absolutely be done in this moment is having young people as myself understand the importance in voting because it's not something we talk about in school very much. It's not something we talk about in casual conversation either. And understanding how important it is to vote and hearing everybody say like, oh, I'm not voting, oh, it's not a big deal. And it is a big deal, it's a huge deal. So I think that needs to change, that we need to be more open about talking about voting and how it works and all the insides and outs of what voting really does for us.
I think there's a lot of work to be done, specifically education about why we should vote, how voting works, how to make sure that everyone understands the process and participates fully. Even education about why you should run for election. And until the day that a woman appears on the ballot in the United States for president and is elected, there will continue to be a lot of work to be done.
When I think of presidential elections, I frequently cry. I cry all the time anyway. I'm a crier. But I think about the fact that the first election I ever voted in was 1980, and Jimmy Carter got voted out of office, and I admired him, and so I cried. And then a decade later, I took my daughter to Disney World, and we were at the Hall of Presidents, and she looked at me and she said, "Mom, why aren't there any female presidents?" And I said, tears falling, you know, someday there will be, Maggie. Maybe you will be one. And then I had tears of a different sort when Barack Obama was elected. Those were tears of joy. I thought, oh, our nation has come so far. Soon there will be a woman president.
I mean, one thing is that the ERA is still not part of the Constitution, the Equal Rights Amendment. And we actually, the Centennial for when that was first proposed is 3 years from now. So yes, I do think that there's still work to be done. We've come a long, long way. And throughout the entire women's rights movement, we've had generation building on top of generation on top of generation. But it's an ongoing quest. And not just women's rights, human rights in general. So yes, there's still work to be done.
We become a society with less and less time to do research, to read what we need to read, to be active maybe in our communities. And I think putting important and truthful and factual information in front of the voter so that the voter can come up to speed if they're not necessarily able to do that is extremely important. I know we get the periodicals, that come with the voting packs. But being able to research or go to certain sites that may not be slanted or that provide all views at your fingertips is extremely important. So I think we have a lot of advantages that we could do there.
But there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. When you think about voter suppression, some of the problems with the Electoral College, kind of the restorative justice aspect of things, where convicted felons, once they are allowed to re-enter society, not being able to vote, social justice, equity issues. So yes, there's 100% still work to do, and I'm here for it. I'm excited to be a part of the conversation.
Since receiving the right to vote in Washington state in 1910, women in Spokane have advanced and supported causes that help women. In addition to May Arkwright Hutton, the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture's collections document, Julia Davis Stewart, president of the League of Women Voters of the United States, the Women's Club of Spokane, Spokane's Cirrhosis Society, Vanessa Behan Crisis Nursery, Marion Moose, a delegate for the Equal Rights Amendment and Women's Studies bookstore owner, political pioneer Representative Agnes Kehoe, the Ladies Benevolent Society, YWCA, and many other women and organizations in Spokane supporting and advancing the message of women helping women. Our next whistle stop on the Suffrage Special is Pasco. Don't miss the chance to explore the suffrage history of southeastern Washington and hear a speech written by one of America's most prominent suffragists. All aboard!